Good morning, afternoon, evening. I don't know, whatever you got. People of the pod, welcome to Office Hours with Carp and Loge, Season 3, Episode 4. We're already made Dave distraught. I am Peter Loge, an associate professor in the School of Media and Public Affairs at the George Washington University and a strategic consultant. And I am joined, as always, by
Dave Karp, also an associate professor at George Washington University School of Media and Public Affairs. I am coming to you today getting over the flu, and so I've decided that today should be our first fake advertisement from a fake sponsor. It's a real company, and I do feel sponsored by them today, but they're just not giving us any money. So I consider us to be sponsored today by Nyquil Severe Cold and Flu with Honey. Nyquil with honey for when you really need flu medicine, but you want it not to taste disgusting. Check it out, or hopefully get your flu shot instead.
it's a yes, and get the flu shot, take the NyQuil, and NyQuil sponsor us because we have several of listeners, many of whom, and
I use your product when I'm sick, as I am right now. Give us a call. And listeners, if you happen to be associated with GW has a free booster shot and flu shot clinic on Friday. Check that out.
And wherever you are, actually go to your local pharmacy or whatever it is, get your flu shot, get your additional booster shot. It's important to do. You don't want to wind up like Dave. And also, if you have things to sell, you want us to hustle, we're pretty clearly not proud. And
I like that this is really, it does have the same vibe as both our office hours and my classroom. Because as any of my students can tell you, the main lesson they get from my class is don't end up like Dave.
Don't end up like Dave. And for the love of God, don't end up like me. Thanks as always to Alana, our producer. You know, she can't survive on our wit and humor. So again, sponsor us. Also, thanks to everybody who's following us, who's rating us on Apple and the interwebs. We got fan mail, Dave. We got fan mail recently from a former graduate student here in SMPA who said it's just like attending class, but without having to pay the tuition, which I'm just going to assume is a good thing.
I'm taking it as a compliment. Yeah.
Take that as a compliment. All right, there's a bunch of stuff going on this week in addition to your ailments. What do you got?
I want to start by just bragging for a minute. So last week, the announcement came out that Biden is pardoning everybody who has been who has served time or was in jail for simple marijuana possession, and then he's taking the first steps to deschedule it as a Schedule 1 narcotic. We are taking the first big steps at the federal level towards marijuana decriminalization. And the reason why I want to brag about this is twice on Twitter in the past month and a half or so, I have called this shit. So back in August, just after the climate bill passed, Ryan Grimm from The Intercept, excellent reporter, noted that if Biden really wants to win, he should immediately follow up by decriminalizing marijuana. And I replied to him saying, nope, save that for the October surprise. 3 weeks later, mid-September, I tweeted on my own just noting, look, I'm seeing all these people on Twitter saying that if Biden wants to win in November, what he needs to do right now is decriminalize marijuana. And I'm here to tell you that now is not the time to decriminalize marijuana. October is the time to decriminalize marijuana. So last week, first week of October, bada bing, bada bang, he does it. I got the timing right. I had nothing else to do with this. This is a major victory for activists who have waged long, hard battles. Nonetheless, I did call the timing, and I'm so proud of myself for it. And also pretty proud of the Biden administration, because the broader point here, the reason you wait for October is it's a good idea to do good policy, and it's also a good idea to stack that policy so that it times well. It's a good idea to do this in October, because if you do this in August, it's not going to be top of mind for voters when they arrive in November. Doing it in October means that this is going to occupy a multi-day news cycle where we're talking about how he just did this and it is good for people, it is sensible policy, and Republicans get to freak out about it and look out of touch with the rest of the country. Then he gets to do another thing. It was just announced today that it looks like they're going to reclassify worker contracts in a way that's going to be really bad for the gig economy and really good for workers and everybody else, because the gig economy sucks, and it's been able to suck just because it's this weird unregulated space competing with more regulated entities. So like they're doing that sensible thing. I think we're gonna have an October of hit after hit after hit of good, sensible policy that also shapes media discussion and leaves us heading into October again. Like it's not gonna change massively the outcome of November, but if political comms is doing what you can with what you have, they are making the best of their situation by timing these good policies well. Way to go, Biden administration, and way to go me for calling this in advance.
All right, so really the takeaway here is Dave is clever and he wants to remind everybody he's clever. But let's talk about what are you advertising there? Don't just drink that. We have to advertise. We're shilling for sponsors here, Dave. What are you drinking?
It's Trader Joe's French vanilla cold brew. It keeps me caffeinated to work out all of the Nyquil that I still have in my system.
So Trader Joe's, if you're listening, really, please give us money. Let's talk about October and the elections, right? You talked about Bill, a couple of things you talked about. I want to draw attention to. One is coming into October, the idea that you can actually make a difference, right? Because a lot of old hand election people will tell you that everything is baked in, by July or by August, and the media is obsessed with October surprises, but voters really don't care and they don't change outcomes very much. But you also said it could make a difference around the margins, and importantly, I think keeping other things off the agenda. So if all of the political news is Biden is helping people, things are getting better, you're forcing other stuff off the agenda that Republicans want to talk about, like immigration and inflation. Is there an October surprise? How much of the electorate is up for grabs, and does it matter where those voters are and that kind of stuff? Talk through that.
So generally speaking, in October, voters come home. This is the reason why we see tightening in the polls in October, is as you get closer to election day, you find that the people who always vote Republican decide, yeah, you know what, I'm actually going to vote Republican this time. People always vote Democrat, same thing happens. People who tend not to vote, remember, we're not going to bother. Most things sort of return to their fundamentals.
All right, so I want to stop you there. So the first lesson then is polls are tightening. Of course, they're tightening. This isn't a surprise to anybody who's worked on more than 2 campaigns in a row or looked at the data. Of course, the Fetterman race is getting closer. Of course, the Ohio race is getting closer. Things revert to the norm. D's vote for D's, R's vote for R's. As you said, voters come home. Second lesson.
Right. And the point there too is that means when Fetterman's polls are tightening, that doesn't mean that the campaign is doing something wrong. Like that was going to happen. The thing you can do in October, there's not going to be an October surprise that radically shifts everything by 20 points. But what you can do is shape what are the final conversations that are going on that are top of mind for voters before they go into the ballot, before they go in on election day. The example that comes to mind that I wrote about last week after this came out, and I decided that I needed to brag on a Substack about being right about this. The example that comes to mind is really the Clinton letter. So back in 2016, there's been data analysis by Nate Silver and others, and I'm pretty well convinced of it, that without James Comey writing that letter to Congress saying, you know what, we're reopening the investigation to Hillary Clinton and her emails, and that was with 2 weeks to go. And then with 1 week to go, he did another announcement saying, you know, we looked into it and yeah, we didn't find anything new. And both those things have a demonstrable effect on what the media is talking about for the final 2 weeks of the election. And instead of talking about the outcomes of the Access Hollywood tape for Trump, which is what had just happened before that, and like Trump was spinning his wheels, Republicans were coming out saying, I kind of unendorse him. That was the set of media cycles, is this like off the rails campaign from a candidate who was off the rails himself. That all shifts over to, oh God, Hillary Clinton, untrustworthy scandal, yada, yada. So for voters who aren't paying a lot of attention and don't really like either of those candidates, what they're thinking about going into election day is, I don't like either of those candidates. I don't trust her. I'm not going to think about the gender that I attach to that, because yeah, I don't trust her is probably gendered. But what they're really just thinking about is, I don't like either of them, but the one that I'm really thinking about right now is the one that I've been hearing about, which is something untrustworthy about that Democratic candidate. So what you can do, given that so much is baked in, given that the polls are going to tighten, is like, yes, do field, do GOTV, yes, do everything that you can, but primarily see what you can do to shape what the final month's coverage is going to be about, so that when people show up on election day, instead of thinking about, I'm kind of scared of brown people, which is what all the immigration plays are really about, is like, let's try to activate some white ethno-nationalism. Like if instead people are coming in thinking like, things are better than they were 2 years ago. America's heading in the right direction, and it's nice to have a sensible government again that listens. If they're thinking about that, then those who are kind of on the fence are going to tend to show up for you. And also the volunteers are going to spend the next month getting no sleep, eating a little bit of pizza, and like working the phones, working the doors to try to help these candidates win. They're going to have something to fight for, which is mean that they're going to push a little harder, which can also matter just at the tiny margins. But the margins is where we decide whether or not we still have free and fair elections 2 years from now. Like everything's at stake.
So there are a couple of parts I want to unpack here. The first, though, is this shaping the narrative at the end. What are people talking about? What's the conversation about? I think one thing you hit on is important or implied is that it has to remind people of something they already believe to be true, right? A lot of people distrusted Clinton. Part of it is gender. Part of it is retired to the Clintons. Part of it is the right-wing media did a pretty good job of attacking the Clinton administration for 8 years. Part of it was he legitimately had an affair with an intern and lied about it. Not sure that's an impeachable offense, but it's certainly very bad behavior. Right. So people go, oh yeah, I kind of knew that already. Oh, that makes sense. It fits an existing narrative, right? And the reason the Access Hollywood stuff would have stuck is because that fits an existing narrative, right? An Access Hollywood tape for Biden just wouldn't make any sense. People just wouldn't buy it. Right. And if it's Biden, if the last month of the narrative is Biden's like getting stuff done, like it's not very sexy and he's not the world's most inspiring guy, but we're getting stuff done, and he's not bananas. That reinforces a positive message. And it contrasts with a negative message for the Republican side. The January 6 hearings are going to resume. Oh, right. Those people are really a little bananas. You've got candidates in Pennsylvania and really in Arizona reinforcing this message that, wow, those people are really a little bit bananas. So that Democrats may say, okay, fine, I'll give them another shot. Anybody on the fence might say, fine, I'll give it another shot. Maybe people turn out who wouldn't have otherwise turned out, right? It seems like the marijuana piece could help a little bit of enthusiasm, right? And it also may help ticket splitters, right? The one that comes to mind is in Georgia, where I think Stacey Abrams is going to lose, but I think Reverend Warnock may pull it off. And what you're seeing in the polling is Abrams has consistently been behind because people tend to like and trust the governor. But Herschel Walker is not, he was a great football player and he should have just said, thank you very much and let us all admire his astonishing work in the field, because he's kind of dumb as a box of rocks. And scandal after scandal is coming out. So it now allows people to go, oh, I'm not going to vote for the scandal-ridden guy. I'll either take a pass or I'll vote for Reverend Warnock because he seems like he's got a good head in his shoulders kind of a guy. So you're reinforcing narratives, which is part of what makes it work. The other piece I want to poke at with this election is what Americans think doesn't matter. What matters is a handful of voters in Pennsylvania, Ohio, Arizona, Nevada, and we're looking at governor's races and Senate races, right? But one of the things that Arizona is driving home is the importance of down ballot races, secretaries of state, the people who actually control the elections. And you've got people running for statewide office in Arizona who are arguing that the state legislature ought to be able to overturn the will of the voters, which runs against everything that's fundamentally American. And in fact, there was a constitutional amendment changing that because the U.S. Senate used to be elected by state legislatures. There's a constitutional amendment saying, no, we trust the people, not the legislators to do it. So it really is a handful of votes here and there can make a huge difference. As the races get smaller, the number of votes being counted gets smaller, the margins get thinner. And these little marginal differences can make a big difference.
That's right. And that also, I think that's an important zoom out that like when we are in springtime episodes of this podcast, I am, I think, more hair on fire than I am right now. And that's because the larger term trends are very scary for American democracy, right? Like we need next month to defeat all of the Secretary of State candidates who have decided that they believe in the independent state legislature doctrine and they can just throw out an election. And we need that because if they just throw out, overthrow the will of the people in an election, and that then leads to a lawsuit, we have 5 or 6 members of the Supreme Court who might decide, hey, you know what? Even though there's a constitutional amendment saying absolutely not, we're going to kind of ignore that one because we really like when Republicans win elections. Like the Supreme Court is enough of a fallen institution that you can no longer rely on it to uphold electoral democracy. So we need voters in a whole lot of states. I mean, it's Arizona and Nevada and Pennsylvania, and I think Michigan, all of these different states that are swing states, to get out the vote and win these down ballot races that voters generally don't care about, just in order to sort of shoot the moon and keep American electoral democracy like barely functional and still going, right? Like the longer term challenge of repairing electoral democracy is one that we don't get to fix this election cycle. This election cycle, you just got to keep everything going long enough that hopefully in the longer term, the Republican Party can fix the Republican Party.
Right.
But for the next month, we're mostly focused on what are the chances of actually making it through this thing. And there, certainly, I think the national Dems playing their hand as well as they can, which I think they are, I think that's good. There's also the big question, the broad question of how much voters, in particular female voters, decide that the overturning of Roe is so radical that that's going to reshape their behavior. I'm gonna hope for that, though I feel like every election cycle we hope that things are different, and often we end up not so sure. So hopefully yes, but I still have fears.
Well, again, with this, although also goes place to place, right? Candidates matter, locations matter. There's some overarching things we know, generally speaking, about elections, like they tighten at the end. But what motivates women voters in Ohio may be different than in Nevada, right? The polling data coming out of Nevada indicates different things about choice and overturning of Roe with the Dobbs decision, right? That's different things than maybe in Arizona. And also people may think differently about Secretary of State than they do US Senate, right? People may think differently about candidates, because candidates matter. If Herschel Walker weren't the Republican candidate in Georgia, we'd be having a different conversation, right? So I think all of these things are also at play. And as you said, only Republicans can fix Republicans, and that comes down to incentives. If pro-democracy, sane conservatives win, that signals to other Republicans, I don't have to be crazy town to get elected, right? I don't need to be Liz Cheney, Representative Cheney, taking on everything, the president and everything else, but I can, be reasonable and sane, which I think is also going to be an important lesson in here. So things to watch for the next 2 weeks, I think, of these trends. The last bit I want to throw in is recent research I've seen on what ads are working. Mm-hmm. And the ads that work don't tend to be this finesse on going for that moderate white woman between 37 and 46 who drives a Mazda minivan. It's broad narratives about clear, big things that matter to people. The economy, turns out corruption also matters, and race matters. It's fairness, it's jobs, it's democracy, and you tell a tight story and you drive it home. And those are the things that matter. Ads matter around the margins, but as you and I have been saying, in an election like this, the margins matter a lot. Mm-hmm. So look for that over the next 2 weeks, and we're going to come back and we're going to talk about once again how right Dave was, because that's apparently his shtick. So that's what we got. What else?
My shtick, but I called it.
You did. I have to say, listeners, when I saw the news that the president was taking this step, my first thought was, Dave's going to be insufferable. And then my thoughts went to the policy and the policy implications, the politics. My first thought was, geez, Dave. And I was right. I called your insufferability right. But I got to be honest, that's not such a hard call.
It's a pretty easy call. It is, yeah. By the way, before we go away from it, since you said it twice, can you spell Ohio for me?
O-H-I-O, Ohio. At Ohio State games, they stand up and they spell it in the stands. The fans spell it in the stands, which tells you, I think, a lot about the state, that the big party trick is they can spell their own state and it's only 4 letters long.
That's really cool. So I live, because I went to Oberlin.
Yeah. So I hear a number of good political scientists. I understand
I went to Oberlin, which is in Ohio. I've never been to this magical land of Ohio, but
that's because they're in different places. That's because they're in different places. If
so.
if you did politics in the field, if you talk to the voters, if you talk to the people, this is Missouri, it's Ohio, it's Washington.
I don't like talking to people.
This is why you're recording this from your bunker. Let's talk some of my favorite politics, and this is going to sound really bad now that I've said it out loud. I love the politics of disaster. I think it's fascinating. One of the best courses I took in grad school at Arizona State was from a guy named Professor Olson, Professor Richard Olson. He's now at Florida International University, and he taught a course on the politics of disaster. Because disasters are obviously a lot of things, right? They're human tragedies, they're financial train wrecks, they have environmental challenges, all sorts of things, but they're also fundamentally political, right? And I think the two things, and Governor DeSantis of Florida, bless his little heart, is a terrific little case study in one of the first things that happens, and that's the claiming of credit and the assignment of blame. And this, I think, Governor DeSantis has done brilliantly. You want to take credit for all the good things. So DeSantis and Biden held their respective noses and did the photo op. So DeSantis says, I'm bringing in federal aid, right? And then he opened the bridge to one of the islands. Apparently the bridge to Sanibel is going to be open sooner than expected. He's doing, as far as I can tell, a really terrific job for his constituents. But there were some problems. One county in particular evacuated more slowly than it probably should have. Things are going to go wrong. There's going to be fraud. People have mismanaged things. It's a stressful situation. Like, people are going to make mistakes. And Governor DeSantis has found a convenient scapegoat, and that is the regime media. We've moved beyond the liberal media. We've moved beyond fake news to regime media. And he actually said that the media, CNN and others, wanted the hurricane to wipe out Tampa. They were rooting for that. I know. I don't know. Apparently there's a conference call every morning at 7 where the media gets on and they decide what they want to do, and they call whoever controls the weather and says, pick this town and wipe out this town. But it reinforces a belief that a lot of his voters already have, which is, it's those people who don't like us and don't trust us anyway. They don't get us there in Washington, you policy elites, you college professors, whatever. So DeSantis deflects the bad to a known enemy who people don't already like, while claiming the good for things that people think he's good at, which is providing for his constituents. It fits the narrative of the election, right? If the narrative continues to be, hey, remember, Biden's kind of the boring guy who's getting stuff done. Hey, DeSantis is the guy who delivers. Hey, Republicans are a little bit wacky and crazy, you can't trust them. Hey, the regime media hates you. I think it's a fascinating case study in the politics of successfully managing a disaster.
Yeah, and I think that's right. The thing that stands out to me is in sort of the medium term, the demonization of media, which, and there's been a lot of scholarship on authoritarianism and fascism that shows that that's one of the key components, is always to demonize media organizations, so that the idea is that your voters cannot trust them, the like independent reporting. In the medium term, I think that also ends up feeding into more corruption and bad governance writ large, right? Like, DeSantis is, I think, quite gifted at playing that honestly pretty basic, and like that is, well, you're right, like it's a good example of the playbook. It's also a playbook that, like, we teach to undergrads, right? Like, this is not incredibly sophisticated stuff. This is stuff that you can get at the 100 or 200 level. The broader challenge of how do you govern a state so that there's not a bunch of fraud and hopefully fewer people die, particularly with climate change, like, we're going to have more cities going underwater. That's a harder challenge, and my sense is that Florida ends up being worse off because this shtick works.
Oh, of course. And you're also seeing a number of people are trying to assign credit and blame for Ian, for its aftermath. Climate activists saying, I told you so, we knew this was coming. Probably disaster planners, we told you this was coming. There are going to be people saying the infrastructure for getting out emergency messages, we told you this was coming. A number of people are going to be trying to claim credit for the good and assign blame elsewhere for the bad, right? And as basic as it is, people get it wrong, right? And Katrina being the case study of this. Heck of a job, Brownie. Those of you who are old enough to not be our students may remember that. But Katrina ends up being like, what is this about, right? Is this generations or centuries of racism and poverty in the lower Ninth Ward, or is it the Army Corps of Engineers and a bunch of bad bureaucrats? I know what to do about bureaucrats. They're easy to blame. They're faceless. They're nameless. We can have an investigation. We can fire some people. That's where the flaw was. right? In Florida, DeSantis is doing the same. He's picking a common enemy. And yes, it is bad for democracy to beat up on the press like this. I was actually, I had a similar conversation with a journalist from The Hill earlier this week, and I got some what might gently be called not fan mail from a reader saying clearly it's propaganda because the press has been beating up on Ron DeSantis. Don't I think this is for 2 years, so, or however many years. So isn't this clearly propaganda that I'm just spewing? This is a report where a bunch of political scientists are pointing out the obvious, which is mostly what we do when we talk to the press. Right. So obviously it's bad, but also I think it's a terrific case study of the politics of disaster.
Yeah.
And shout out to, again, Professor Rich Olson at FIU. A really interesting class, really interesting guy. All right. You got anything else? You have anything else?
I should probably mention Elon Musk.
Wait a minute. We've been Musk free for 2 episodes.
I know, but he did a thing. So Elon Musk is now, they were supposed to start the trial next week. He was supposed to be deposed last week in this trial where Twitter was trying to get him to go through with the contract to buy Twitter for $44 billion. Last week, he came back and said, I'll tell you what, if we drop the trial, I'll buy Twitter for $44 billion. And they were like, show us the money first. And sure, sounds good. So they're now haggling over the specifics. The trial's been delayed 3 weeks. The claim that it appears, if we trust him at his word, that Elon has now decided that he wants to own Twitter again for exactly the price he offered to pay for it. Like maybe he'll own Twitter when we're back on this, in which case my guess is that Twitter is going to slowly become unusable because writing these things is hard and I don't think he's very good at it. Or maybe he won't, and it'll get even weirder and dumber by the time we're on, we record our next podcast. It'll be one of those two things. But yeah, Elon Musk, back to being kind of weird and all over the place.
But I understand he's solving the war in Ukraine in the meantime.
Yeah, through a Twitter poll.
I think so. I think that's the solution we've all been waiting for. He
also showed off how he's going to manage bad behavior on Twitter after Kanye West was suspended from Twitter for just outright anti-Semitism, saying that he was going to go DEFCON 3 on the Jews and got his account suspended. Apparently, Elon called him up and talked with him, and then tweeted that, I talked to him and I think he really he really took it to heart. So yeah, that's going to scale really well, Elon. He's just, I guess, going to personally call every single Twitter Nazi and anti-Semite and talk them through whenever they do anything bad. Such a cluster.
One more reminder that just because you have money doesn't mean you're smart. And if you have money and people are being nice to you, they're probably lying because they would like some of your money. Yeah. I do want to throw one thing out there, the weird and scary thing that made my hair hurt this week. According to the New York Times, who talked to a bunch of scientists, and I don't fully understand any of this, but there's a chance that gravity and quantum physics are the same thing. It used to be you could explain gravity or everything else. Apparently now they may be the same. And there's speculation that everything in our universe is effectively just one big hologram, some complicated projection out of a big black hole. So, there's some food for thought.
What?
It'll be in the footnotes. Go to peterloach.com/podcast. It'll be in the footnotes.
Here's my this is, I had not read that report. It does remind me a little of, there's a discourse that sometimes happens amongst Elon Musk and a lot of tech elites about this idea that we might be living in a computer simulation, which I wrote about on Substack last week as an aside. But the thing that stands out for me, my recommendation to listeners, there's a great novel that came out last year called Sea of Tranquility by Emily St. John Mandel. She's also the author of Station 11, which got turned into a great HBO Max show. But it's this wonderful, wonderful book. And I don't want to spoil it, but there's an aside in the book where she kind of references this idea of what if we live in a computer simulation? And her answer to it in the book is, even if we do, we just keep on living. Like, okay, let's say that we all live in a hologram projected from a black hole. Like, I'm a little curious why the hologram from a black hole gave me the flu. Like,
it doesn't like you.
Also, like, can my knee not hurt? Like, those are weird things to put in the hologram. But either way, like, we're just gonna keep on living. Like, just keep living.
So two thoughts. One, Einstein famously said that God does not play dice, which is why he's trying to figure out the secret to the universe. And a later retort in examining quantum mechanics was apparently God does play dice, and sometimes he throws them where you can't find them. The the science fiction novel, though, actually brings us back to one of my favorite topics, which is Richard Rorty, and his argument that if everything is made up anyway, like we live these. We pretend there's a truth out there. There isn't really a truth. We can't possibly know it, but we should still sort of muddle through. We can act as if there's one because we've got to do something in the morning, and that just seems to make things work better. So just do that, which I think is a fantastic look at things. This took a weird turn at the end. I'm blaming you, Nyquil. I'm blaming you, Nyquil. So you're on the Substacks. You've alluded to them, and the Nyquil sponsor us, Nyquil. Where plug your Substacks to the people.
So davekarp.substack.com. I just passed 1,000 readers. That's pretty cool. But I write roughly weekly essays on politics, on technology, sometimes on climate stuff. Sometimes it's more than once a week. But yeah, that's where I write my essays these days. I'm also on Twitter as @DaveKarp. What about you?
I am at PLOGE on Twitter, at PLoge, online at peterloge.com/podcast for the footnotes. And I'm going to shout out actually another Substack you should read, kind of Grant Wall, WAHL. He's an American soccer writer, covering the World Cup, but he's also writing a lot about the human rights abuses in Qatar and all of the thousands of people who have died building the stadia and the hotels. And I think the question that I want to pick up in a couple of weeks in this podcast is what is the strategic communications angle here? You've got a huge global spotlight. The biggest global spectacle on earth is the Men's World Cup, and it's going to be shining a light on a country that has a complicated human rights record, to put it very, very gently. So how can advocates use this moment for change, and what responsibility do journalists have while covering the games, which could be a really terrific tournament, to also draw attention to the human rights abuses? Grant has been really outspoken on this, and look for more from Grant on that in the coming weeks. So I think we're to thank you, Dave. I hope you feel better. Nyquil, I hope you sponsor us so we can afford to keep Dave feeling better. And people of the pod, keep, follow us, rate us, tweet us, give us some love from the void. See you in a couple of weeks.
Bye, folks.